They say history is written by the survivors. But what if some civilizations didn't just vanish? They were erased, buried under oceans, sealed beneath ice, or hidden inside myths we were never meant to read. Across the world, we keep finding traces, stones carved with impossible precision, maps thousands of years ahead of their time, structures aligned with the sky like ancient machines, and legends that sound less like stories and more like lost technology. Modern science calls them anomalies. Archaeologists call them outliers. But in the classified corners of forgotten research labs, these aren't coincidences. They're warnings from civilizations that knew far more than we do today and disappeared anyway. Tonight, we open 10 lost civilizations modern science can't explain. And once you see what they left behind, you'll never look at human history the same way again. Welcome to Archive 9. They say Atlantis was a parable, a moral lesson wrapped in myth. But if you strip away the symbolism, the poetic language, the warnings, you're left with details that feel uncomfortably technical, too technical for a story written 2,300 years ago. Plato described an island shaped like a machine. Circular canals, concentric rings, metallic towers that glowed at night. But the most striking detail comes from later translations of the Egyptian records he claimed to have used. References to enormous crystals placed at the heart of the city. Crystals that captured the light of the sun, amplified natural forces, and radiated energy across the empire. Most historians read that as metaphor. But what if it wasn't? Quartz, when compressed, generates electrical charge. It vibrates at precise frequencies. It can store energy. This principle powers early radios, watches, and some of the world's first electronic transmitters. Yet the idea appears in ancient texts long before modern science ever documented it. According to esoteric manuscripts attributed to the Greek and Egyptian mystery schools, Atlantis relied on something called the Great Crystal, a monolithic pillar of translucent stone embedded deep inside the central temple. Some accounts describe it as a power source. Others say it was used for communication, navigation, healing, even weapons. One fragment, preserved in a 17th century French translation of Hermetic lore, claims the crystal sang like thousands of voices when storms approached, as if responding to electromagnetic pressure. If true, the Atlanteans weren't just using crystals. They were manipulating resonance, frequency, vibration, the very foundation of energy technology. But here's where myth begins to blur into archaeology. In the Bahamas, divers have found stone blocks cut with machine-like precision, geometries too consistent to be accidental. Local legends call them the humming stones, claiming they once vibrated in the presence of certain tides. Magnetic anomalies still occur there today. Compasses drift unpredictably, and underwater instruments sometimes malfunction for no clear reason. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans revealed what looked like pyramid-like structures arranged in geometric patterns at depths, suggesting they sank around the end of the last ice age, roughly the same period Plato placed Atlantis. Skeptics call these natural formations. Others aren't so sure. Ancient writings say the Atlanteans built crystal arrays that amplified Earth's energy grid. Modern geologists admit that the Atlantic seafloor is riddled with quartz-rich ridges capable of conducting electromagnetic currents. Is that a coincidence? Maybe. But Atlantis myths repeatedly connect crystals, energy, and catastrophic failure. One legend describes a resonant cascade, an experiment meant to increase the city's power output that destabilized the entire system. A harmonic feedback loop, a runaway reaction, a disaster. Imagine a civilization using giant crystal capacitors to draw power from tides, storms, volcanic pressure, until one day the energy overwhelmed the grid. A surge, a collapse, a detonation. The island didn't simply sink. It failed, like a machine pushed past its limit. And here's the part modern scientists find hardest to ignore. Studies of quartz resonance show that massive crystals under extreme stress can generate plasma-like discharges, electrical arcs, bright enough to be described as columns of fire, beams of light, or the wrath of the gods by societies trying to explain what they saw. Atlantis, in its final hours, may have been a city tearing itself apart with its own technology. We may never find definitive proof. We may never lift the ruins from the ocean floor or recover a real Atlantean crystal. But the recurring pattern is chilling. A civilization mastering energies they barely understood. Crystals humming with power, a sudden collapse, and then silence. If Atlantis did exist, if their electric crystals were real, then their fate is more than a myth. It's a warning. Because humanity, once again, stands at the edge of new energy technologies. And history, if this is history, suggests that the greatest danger comes not from what we discover, but from what we believe we've already mastered. Some civilizations disappear without a trace. Lemuria is worse. It's a civilization that leaves just enough behind to make you wonder if the entire world has forgotten something it was never meant to remember. Most people hear Lemuria and think of myth, another lost continent like Atlantis. But scattered across the Pacific and Indian Oceans are fragments of stories, symbols, and artifacts that point toward a culture so old, so unusual, and so technologically strange that even fringe archaeologists hesitate to categorize it. The heart of the mystery lies in one object repeated from Polynesian chants to Tamil temple inscriptions, the sun disk, a perfectly circular plate of metal or crystal said to glow with an internal light, not reflecting the sun, but imitating it. In Sri Lankan folklore, the sun disk was a talking mirror that sent messages across mountains. In Polynesian oral histories, it was a sky stone used by navigators to sense invisible paths over the ocean. And in the legends of Madagascar, one of the last supposed remnants of Lemuria, the disk was described as a ring of day, an artifact carried by priest-scientists who used it to summon warmth, read signs in the sky, and communicate at long distances. These stories shouldn't agree with each other. Different cultures, different languages, isolated by thousands of miles of ocean, yet the descriptions match with unnerving precision. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In the late 19th century, British explorers documented a strange artifact in a ruined temple near Pondicherry, India. A flat, gold-colored disc embedded with crystal inlays arranged in concentric rings. It was dismissed as ceremonial. But in the 1970s, a physicist re-examined the drawings and noticed something important. The pattern looked like a waveguide, a design used in modern electronics to channel radio frequencies. If accurate, this meant the sun disk wasn't a symbol, it was a device. And the story gets stranger. Across the Pacific, in Easter Island, the farthest inhabited point from India, there are carvings depicting a nearly identical disk held by figures with elongated heads. The Rapa Nui people said the disk came from the land that sank beneath the waves, a place west of them where the first navigators once lived, a land swallowed by the ocean after the sun went silent. Researchers began to notice a pattern. Wherever the sun disk appeared, stories about Lemuria followed, a civilization that supposedly mastered energy through sunlight, resonance, and crystal amplification. Not fire, not metal, but light. Some legends say Lemurian temples house massive disks capable of storing solar power, like ancient capacitors. Others suggest they were communication arrays, transmitting information through frequencies the human ear cannot detect. A few even claim the disks allowed long-distance healing rituals, projecting focused beams of light across great distances. Impossible? Maybe. But there's a physical clue hiding in the one place we least expect it: the ocean floor. Seismic scans from the Indian Ocean reveal enormous stone ridges arranged in geometric patterns, too linear to be natural, too massive to be recent. Some of these formations align with solar events. Others line up perfectly with energy hotspots where Earth's magnetic field is unusually strong. If Lemuria ever existed, its cities might have been built not around water, but around solar power nodes, using their disks to collect and redistribute energy across the region. But legends rarely end peacefully. One Tamil verse speaks of the day the disks cracked, describing a blinding flash that tore the sky into pieces. A Polynesian chant tells of the warming that killed the sea, as if the disks generated more heat than anyone intended. And a Sri Lankan myth warns of the silent night, a time when the sun disks stopped glowing, leaving their society in darkness. Across three oceans, the message is the same: a great civilization, powered by devices that harness the sun itself, suffered a catastrophic failure. The disks overheated. The power network collapsed, and the land fell into the sea. Modern science says Lemuria never existed, that continents don't just disappear, that no ancient culture had anything resembling solar technology. But the stories persist, the symbols repeat, and every now and then, an artifact surfaces, etched with the same concentric rings, the same radial marks, the same geometry we only understand today through physics textbooks. If Lemuria was real, then it wasn't lost to time. It was erased by the very technology that made it extraordinary. Long before the Maya carved their calendars and long before the Aztecs raised their temples, there was another civilization, older, quieter, and far more mysterious: the Olmecs, a people who emerged from the jungles of southern Mexico nearly 3,500 years ago and then disappeared, leaving behind colossal stone heads and a riddle modern science still struggles to explain. The riddle begins with a stone, not a sculpture, not an altar, a lodestone, a naturally magnetic mineral carved into a smooth bar. It was discovered in the 1960s by chance, buried deep in soil that hadn't been disturbed for millennia. Archaeologists placed it on a flat surface and watched as it slowly rotated, aligning itself north to south with uncanny precision. A compass. A Mesoamerican compass, crafted nearly 2,000 years before the Chinese invention we usually credit. At first, this was considered an oddity, an accidental shape, a meaningless coincidence. But then more artifacts surfaced: magnetic figurines, magnetized ceremonial bars, stone tools carved with such orientation that they behaved like primitive instruments. It became impossible to dismiss the pattern. The Olmecs didn't just know about magnetism, they measured it. The more researchers studied Olmec sites, the stranger it became. Many of their major ceremonial centers, San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, sit directly on top of geological zones where Earth's magnetic field bends and fluctuates. These aren't random locations. They're hot spots where a magnetic needle will twitch, dip, or swing. The exact kind of places a civilization with magnetic awareness might consider sacred or useful. Then came the carvings. Across several Olmec monuments are deep, straight grooves, etched with engineering-level precision, forming long channels that don't match astronomical alignments or ritual pathways. But when a geophysicist overlaid modern magnetic maps onto the monument's layouts, something astonishing happened. The grooves matched the magnetic anomalies beneath the ground. It was as though the Olmecs had traced an invisible grid, one that modern scientists only detected with high-tech sensors thousands of years later. Some scholars now believe the Olmecs were the world's first magnetic cartographers, that they created the earliest maps not of rivers or mountains, but of Earth's shifting electromagnetic landscape. A map drawn with no ink, no parchment, only stone, orientation, and an understanding of forces invisible to the human eye. But the theory goes deeper. In carvings found at La Venta, several figures hold flat, rectangular tablets to their chests, objects made of magnetite, carved with perfect symmetry. Were these religious symbols or handheld magnetic detectors used to locate energy-rich sites where temples or altars would later be placed? Some believe the Olmecs used magnetism to choose where their cities would rise. Others think they harnessed it for navigation, trade, or even communication rituals. A few fringe theorists go further, suggesting these magnetic hubs formed a kind of primitive energy network, a natural grid that influenced everything from architecture to ceremony. Mainstream archaeology rejects this. It argues that the Olmecs were brilliant sculptors, not scientists, that any magnetic alignment is coincidence, that simple exposure to lightning or heat could magnetize stone unintentionally. But there's a problem with that explanation. The magnetism isn't random. It's consistent, repeated, deliberate, and then there is the disappearance. Around 400 BCE, the Olmec world abruptly collapsed. Cities were abandoned, monuments were toppled and buried, population centers vanished into jungle. No plague, no invasion, no drought large enough to explain the scale of the decline. Some researchers believe the Olmecs relied on magnetic cues for seasonal cycles, agriculture, and ceremony. Patterns disrupted by a sudden geomagnetic shift or regional anomaly. If their entire worldview, calendar, and navigation system depended on a magnetic field that unexpectedly changed, the consequences would have been catastrophic. A civilization built around the Earth's energy lines, undone by the Earth itself. Today, the magnetic stones remain. The maps remain. The alignments remain. Silent evidence of a culture that might have understood a natural force long before the rest of humanity discovered it. If the Olmecs truly mastered magnetism, then their disappearance isn't just a mystery. It's a warning that even the most advanced knowledge can be wiped away, leaving only stone and questions and an invisible grid humming beneath our feet. Across the Indian subcontinent, ancient temples rise like frozen thunder. Stone towers carved with gods, warriors, and stories older than recorded history. But hidden in these stories is something that doesn't fit the ancient world at all. Something that sounds more like technology than mythology, the Vimana. To most, the Vimana is a flying chariot of the gods, a poetic image found in Hindu epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana. But when you read the original Sanskrit without modern interpretation, the descriptions stop sounding mythical and start sounding mechanical. One passage describes a vimana as a chariot that moves by the power of the wind and the fire within. Another says it shone like the sun and produced a continuous humming. A third lists metals, Rajaloha, Tamra, Arca, materials that some scholars believe refer to sophisticated alloys. But the real shock came in 1952. A Sanskrit manuscript titled the Vaimanika Shastra resurfaced in India, claiming to be a technical manual for building vimanas. It contained diagrams of flying machines with aerodynamic shapes, rotating systems, heat shields, and propulsion chambers. Mainstream scholars quickly denounced it, arguing it was written in the early 1900s, not ancient times. But one detail keeps bothering researchers. How did the author describe mechanical features that wouldn't appear in aviation until decades later? Even more troubling were the descriptions of weapons associated with the Vimanas. The Mahabharata describes a shining spear of light that produced heat so intense it caused hair and nails to fall out. People miles away washed their bodies and metal objects after the attack. Archaeologists have found sections of ancient cities in the Indus Valley with layers of fused sand, glass-like surfaces formed only under extreme heat, comparable to a nuclear blast. Coincidence? Maybe, but the pattern is hard to ignore. Further south in Sri Lanka's ancient city of Anuradhapura, stone platforms marked with concentric symbols appear eerily similar to launch pads. Local lore calls them the resting places of sky machines. At the same time, high atop Himalayan peaks, scattered legends tell of circular craft that moved without wings, fueled by the sun and the breath of the earth. Some researchers believe the Vimanas weren't literal aircraft, but metaphors for spiritual ascension. Others argue the reverse, that spiritual language was used to hide advanced technology from uninitiated readers. In Hindu tradition, knowledge was often layered, one meaning for the public, another for scholars, a third for the adepts. But the deeper you dig, the more technical the Vimana becomes. In certain texts, the Vimana pilot sits at a control console described as a crystal circle. In another, the ship requires specific types of fuel, plant-based oils, mercury, and a mysterious substance called somna, believed by some to be a form of ionized gas or plasma. Mercury vortex propulsion, once fringe pseudoscience, is now a topic studied in experimental physics. But the most unsettling detail comes from the Samarangana Sutradhara, a Sanskrit treatise describing how a vimana can hover, ascend vertically, or move like a bird without beating its wings. One chapter outlines defensive mechanisms, mirrors that bend heat, shields that disrupt projectiles, and a system that produces smoke that blinds the enemy. This isn't mythology. This is engineering. Mainstream Indian archaeologists insist there's no physical evidence of aircraft, no wreckage, no engines, no metal parts. But what if the Vimanas weren't made of metal? Some Sanskrit texts describe them as wooden frames coated with heat-resistant resin, materials that would rot long before reaching modern times. Others claim the true Vimanas were made of alloys the world has yet to rediscover. And then there is the disappearance. Some texts claim the Vimana knowledge was withdrawn intentionally, sealed away when the age of darkness approached, that the sages hid the manuals to prevent misuse. Another story says the gods themselves destroyed the machines to keep humanity from repeating a devastating war fought with sky weapons. Whatever happened, the silence is complete. The manuals vanished, the machines vanished, and all that remains are scattered carvings, cryptic passages, and a sense that ancient India knew something we lost. If the Vimana was real, even partly real, then it means our ancestors weren't just storytellers. They were engineers, pilots, and witnesses to a kind of technology modern science still can't explain. A technology that soared into the sky, then fell into myth. High on a dry hill in southeastern Turkey, surrounded by windswept fields and silent horizons, lies a site that shouldn't exist. Göbekli Tepe, a stone complex so old, so precise, so overwhelmingly advanced that it breaks the timeline of human history in half, before pottery, before metal, before cities, before writing. There was this place, 12,000 years old, built at the end of the last ice age, when humans were supposed to be nothing more than scattered hunter-gatherers with simple tools and no architecture. And yet here it stands, massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles, carvings of animals sculpted with anatomical accuracy, complex geometric patterns, a layout that suggests astronomy, ritual, and engineering beyond anything we thought possible for that period. But the strangest part isn't how it was built, it's what happened after. Göbekli Tepe wasn't abandoned. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't eroded by time. It was buried, deliberately, carefully, stone by stone, layer by layer, entombed under tons of dirt until the temple disappeared completely, preserved like a time capsule waiting for modern archaeologists to uncover it. A civilization rebuilt it, used it, and then buried it themselves. Why? The leading theory is ritual. Another says it marked the transition from nomadic life to agriculture. But the deeper researchers dig, the more it looks like something else entirely, a deliberate act of erasure. Some of the pillars show signs of reconstruction, as if earlier structures were torn down and replaced with improved versions. And the carvings tell a story. Predators, serpents, scorpions, vultures carrying human heads, symbols of danger, death, and transformation. A few researchers believe these carvings document a real event, an ancient catastrophe, perhaps a meteor impact or a climate collapse that wiped out large portions of the population at the end of the Ice Age. One pillar, known as the Vulture Stone, has been interpreted by some astronomers as a star map showing the exact position of constellations around 10,950 BCE, the approximate date of a known comet impact recorded in ice cores. If true, Göbekli Tepe may not have been a temple. It may have been a warning, a memorial built by survivors of a lost civilization, a culture older, more advanced than the world has accepted. But the burial remains the greatest mystery. Why would a civilization invest enormous effort into constructing a monumental complex only to entomb it deliberately? Was it an act of protection, to preserve knowledge, a ritual closure, to seal away power, or something more desperate? There is a theory, controversial but haunting, that Göbekli Tepe was buried because the knowledge it contained was too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. That when the older civilization collapsed, the last guardian sealed the site and disappeared. Supporting this idea is the sheer thoroughness of the burial. It wasn't a quick collapse or a natural landslide. The fill material is uniform, intentionally placed, and contains object carefully arranged as if part of a ritualized shutdown, almost like the closing of an ancient research facility. And the moment Göbekli Tepe was sealed, the world changed. Agriculture exploded across the region. Settlements grew. Humanity shifted from nomads to builders. It's as if knowledge or people from Göbekli Tepe spread into the surrounding areas, accelerating civilization. But the original builders, gone. No graves, no tools, no homes, no evidence of who they were or where they went. Only the temple remains, rebuilt, recarved, perfected, and then hidden. Mainstream archaeologists insist the site was ceremonial. They deny the presence of an advanced precursor culture. They argue there is no evidence of a forgotten civilization. But the facts are stubborn. Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by 7,000 years, older than the pyramids by 6,000. It appeared fully formed, with no signs of evolution, and then it was buried on purpose. Something happened on that hill thousands of years ago, something powerful enough to make an entire culture hide its greatest achievement beneath the earth. What were they protecting? What were they afraid of? And what would happen if we ever uncover all of it? From above, the Nazca Desert looks like a message written for the sky. Hundreds of lines, shapes, pathways, and symbols stretching across 500 square kilometers of bone-dry earth in southern Peru. Some are so long they vanish over the horizon. Some are so straight they barely deviate a centimeter across many miles. And none of them make sense, at least not in the way we understand ancient civilizations. For decades, archaeologists said the Nazca lines were ceremonial walkways, a kind of giant temple floor for rituals honoring sky gods. A poetic answer, but the lines don't behave like ritual paths. They behave like instruments. The first clue is their placement. Nazca sits on one of the strangest geological formations in South America, a desert floor rich in quartz, basalt, and iron, minerals that conduct electromagnetic currents beneath the surface. When underground water shifts, when tectonic plates strain, when the sun hits the desert at a specific angle, subtle natural electric fields ripple under the soil. These fields are invisible, silent, but the Nazca lines trace them almost perfectly. In the 1980s, a team of geophysicists scanned the region and noticed something uncanny. The densest concentrations of Nazca lines sit directly on top of the strongest telluric currents, electrical pathways created by the Earth itself. Straight lines follow energy flows. Trapezoids widen over magnetic peaks. Spirals cluster above subsurface anomalies. It looked less like an art project and more like a circuit diagram. Then there are the shapes, giant figures etched with geometric precision. Some animals are drawn as if simplified into electrical symbols. A hummingbird shaped like an antenna, a monkey with a spiral tail resembling a coil, a spider with legs positioned exactly at cardinal points. Coincidence? Maybe, but the patterns are too consistent to ignore. And yet the most revealing designs aren't the animals. They're the trapezoids. These enormous shapes, some wide as airports, others narrowing to a sharp point, act like gigantic collectors. When sunlight hits them, the temperature difference between light stone and dark surrounding soil creates natural conductivity. The trapezoids don't just look like capacitors, they behave like them. Several researchers now believe the Nazca people were experimenting with ways to amplify, redirect, or track natural Earth energy. Not electricity as we know it, but the planet's own slow pulsing currents, a prehistoric attempt to understand the invisible. But why? One theory suggests the Nazca were monitoring water. The desert sits above a hidden network of aquifers, ancient underground rivers. The lines may have mapped their flow, or even help locate weak points where the ground tingles with electromagnetic activity from moving water. Another theory is cosmic. The Nazca could have been using the lines as astronomical sightlines, huge solar instruments that track solstices, equinoxes, and star alignments. Energy from above meeting energy from below. But there's a third possibility, one that leaps beyond archaeology, that the Nazca lines were an early form of communication grid, a massive open-air system designed to project signals upward, not visual signals, not sound, but frequency. A tuning of the earth itself, a conversation with the sky. Indigenous elders in a region speak of the lines as paths of force and say they were used to call the rain, speak to the gods, or wake the sleeping mountains. Poetic metaphors, perhaps, or memories of a technology so old the meaning has softened into myth. Critics argue there is no tool, no artifact, no machine left behind to support this. But maybe the earth itself was the tool, the desert was the machine, the sky was the receiver. And then around 600 CE, something happened. A severe, decades-long drought devastated the region. The climate changed. The underground water shifted. The electromagnetic balance of the desert broke. And the Nazca culture collapsed almost overnight. If the Nazca really built a system that depended on stable Earth energy, a shift in climate or magnetic patterns could have destroyed everything they built, not physically, but fundamentally. Their measurements no longer worked. Their signals no longer carried. Their world stopped speaking back. Today, the Nazca lines sit perfectly preserved, protected by a climate so dry, a human footprint can last centuries. But the meaning is gone. The purpose is silent. All that remains are the patterns, vast, precise, unnervingly intentional. Were the Nazca simply artists of the desert, or engineers of a planetary instrument, one that modern science is only now beginning to understand? Either way, the lines wait, still aligned, still humming beneath the surface, still pointing toward a mystery older than recorded history. In the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, humanity etched its earliest stories into wet clay. Creation myths, kingship lists, poems older than the pyramids. But buried in those cuneiform tablets is a narrative unlike anything in world mythology, a story that sounds less like legend and more like a record. The story of the Anunnaki. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were not gods in the modern sense. They were described as beings of flesh and bone, arriving from the sky, working alongside early humans, and passing down knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, even kingship itself. But the most unsettling detail appears not in the myths, but in the vocabulary. The Sumerians wrote that humanity was fashioned by the Anunnaki using something called essence of life, a phrase scholars normally translate as divine will, but the original term is far more literal. It refers to a substance within the blood, something extracted, something altered, a code. For decades, mainstream archaeologists dismissed this as symbolic. But then came the strange pattern within the tablets. Repeated descriptions of beings working in a house of life, cutting, mixing, cleansing, rewriting, words eerily similar to biological processes. Diagrams resembling double helices adorn seals that should have contained only religious symbols, and one carved cylinder seal, cataloged as VIM 243, shows figures standing before a device with spiraling lines arranged in parallel, like strands of genetic material. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the references continue. In the Atrahasis epic, humans are created using blood of a god mixed with clay. In another, the Anunnaki bind the form of the new humans. In the Enki and Ninmah myth, failed prototypes are described, creatures who cannot speak, cannot reproduce, or suffer deformities until the proper mixture is found. This is not the language of mythology, it is the language of trial and error. And then there is the longevity puzzle. Sumerian kings were said to live hundreds or thousands of years, spans modern biologists say are impossible for humans, unless their DNA was altered to slow cellular decay. Some tablets record specific ages that correspond almost perfectly to mathematical multiples, as if the numbers represent genetic markers, not literal lifespans. But the most controversial idea comes from linguistics. Human language, according to evolutionary scientists, should develop gradually. Yet Sumerian appears in the archaeological record fully formed, a complex, isolated language with no gradual lead-up, no simpler ancestors, and no linguistic relatives anywhere on Earth. It's as if someone flipped a switch, as if someone taught it. Researchers studying mitochondrial DNA have found unexplained anomalies, tiny sequences that don't match known evolutionary transitions, fragments that mutate slower than expected, segments that look inserted. No one dares call this genetic engineering, not in academic journals. But behind closed doors, some scientists admit the data is strange. Strange enough to raise questions that sound uncomfortably close to the Sumerian versions of human origins. Of course, there are skeptics. They argue the Anunnaki stories reflect metaphor, not biology, that ancient people described life using poetic imagery, not literal science, that apparent genetic anomalies are simply statistical noise. And yet, why does every major Sumerian creation text describe beings modifying the flesh of man? Why do the earliest depictions of humans show them suddenly advanced, building cities, observing stars, creating laws? Why does the archaeological record jump from primitive hunter-gatherers to complex city builders in what feels like an evolutionary instant? And why do so many cultures, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and even distant Mesoamerican, share almost identical myths of sky beings who shaped humanity? Either ancient civilizations coincidentally invented the same story thousands of miles apart, or they were remembering something real. One last detail lingers in the shadows. A Sumerian text claims the Anunnaki left codes within mankind, markers that would awaken when the time is right. The translation is debated, the meaning unclear, but for some, the implication is chilling. If the Anunnaki were real, if they manipulated early human DNA, then traces of their work might still be inside us, silent, dormant, waiting. Are we the authors of our own evolution, or the product of a genetic project carried out in a forgotten age? High in the mountains of Lebanon lies an ancient platform so massive, so impossibly engineered, that even today's builders stand in silence before it. This is Baalbek, a complex that has been rebuilt by Romans, used by medieval empires, and worshipped by countless cultures. But beneath the temples and columns everyone recognizes, there is something far older, something that does not belong to any known civilization: the foundation stones. Three colossal blocks of limestone, each weighing between 750 and 800 tons, form a perfect retaining wall known as the trilithon. And nearby lies an even greater enigma: the stone of the pregnant woman, a 1,000-ton monolith cut so precisely its corners are sharp enough to slice skin. Even more shocking, beneath it, archaeologists discovered a second stone, 1,650 tons, carved but never moved. The largest building block ever shaped by human hands. But the real mystery isn't their size. It's that these stones were placed with perfect alignment, fitted so tightly that a blade of grass cannot slip between them, using techniques no ancient civilization in the region was known to possess. The Romans built temples on top of Baalbek, yes, but they never moved stones this large. They didn't have the means. No pulleys, no cranes, no workforce could lift even one of these blocks, let alone set them into a foundation 6 meters above the ground. So who did it? Some scholars argue the stones were carved in place, but geological analysis shows they came from a quarry nearly a kilometer away. Others suggest the blocks were transported using rollers or ropes, methods that collapse instantly under the weight of anything above 200 tons. And yet the stones sit there, unmoved in 2,000 years, arranged with precision modern engineers struggle to replicate. The deeper archaeologists dig, the stranger the story becomes. Underneath the Roman layers lie older blocks, larger, rougher, more eroded, stacked in diminishing sizes like the layers of a civilization descending into memory. Each era built on top of the last, but the foundations, they remain a puzzle. A controversial theory suggests Baalbek began as a landing platform, a sky platform built by an unknown prehistoric culture. Ancient texts from the region call Baalbek the place of ascent, the city of the sun, and the gateway of the gods. One legend claims the stones were laid by giants under the command of a sky king. Another says they were set in place before the flood. But myths aside, the engineering defies explanation. The trilithon stones are positioned with micro-adjustments that compensate for seismic movement, technology that shouldn't have existed in the Bronze Age. The joints are angled to distribute pressure, reducing structural stress, and the entire platform aligns with astronomical markers, including solstice points and stellar events, suggesting not just architecture, but purpose. Some researchers believe the stones were part of a prehistoric earthquake-resistant foundation, an anti-seismic platform designed to anchor something enormous. Not a temple, something heavier, something mechanical. But here's where the mystery turns darker. New surveys show that the Baalbek platform sits directly on top of a magnetic anomaly, a region where Earth's natural electromagnetic field bends unpredictably. The stones themselves contain iron-rich minerals that conduct energy. Taken together, the structure resembles a gigantic stabilizer or grounding array, a foundation not for a building, but for a machine. Mainstream archaeology rejects this interpretation, insisting the stones were simply part of an ambitious but incomplete construction project. Yet this explanation fails to address one glaring question. Why was so much effort spent building a platform that later civilizations repurposed, but never understood? And why does the precision and scale of the foundation far exceed anything built above it? It's as if the Romans were tenants, not architects, as if they inherited a structure so ancient that its original purpose was already forgotten. Some fringe historians believe the Baalbek stones are remnants of a lost civilization, one that mastered large-scale engineering thousands of years earlier than history allows, a culture capable of lifting 1,000-ton blocks with ease, a culture wiped out by catastrophe, leaving only its foundations behind. If true, Baalbek is not just archaeology. It is evidence, silent, immovable, undeniable, that humanity once shared the planet with builders whose knowledge we no longer possess. And the question is not who they were, but what they built Baalbek for. Antarctica is a place untouched by time, an endless kingdom of ice where wind carves mountains into knives and the sun hovers on the horizon like a distant memory. But among the white silence lies a structure that should not exist, a shape so precise, so geometric, so impossible, that it has forced scientists, explorers, and conspiracy researchers into the same uneasy question: why is there a pyramid in Antarctica? The first photographs surfaced in the 1940s, taken by U.S. Navy pilots during Operation High Jump. At first they looked like ordinary mountains, but one stood out, a peak with four smooth sides converging into a perfect apex, each face angled with uncanny symmetry. Too symmetrical, too clean, too exact to be natural. Skeptics called it a nunatak, an exposed rock peak rising through the ice. But experienced geologists quickly pointed out the problem. Nunataks are jagged, broken, sculpted by brutal freeze-thaw cycles. This one was sharp-edged, triangular, and almost mathematically aligned. Over the next decades, more images appeared. Satellite photographs showing multiple pyramid-like formations arranged miles apart, some partially buried under ice thousands of years old. If these were truly man-made, they predated every known civilization by tens of thousands of years. Mainstream scientists dismiss the idea immediately, insisting the shapes are natural, and maybe some are, but then you notice their orientation. Several align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, just like the Great Pyramid of Giza. Others arrange themselves in triangular patterns mirroring constellations, visible over Antarctica 12,000 years ago. And here's the chilling part. The last time Antarctica's coast was ice-free enough for large-scale construction was roughly 12,000 years ago. That date again, the end of the Ice Age. The same era linked to global floods, lost continents, mysterious disappearances, and the collapse of prehistoric cultures. Coincidence? Or the edge of a forgotten story? Some researchers argue the pyramids could be remnants of a lost civilization, one that existed during a climatic window when Antarctica wasn't a frozen wasteland, but a temperate continent with forests, rivers, and life. This isn't fantasy. Fossil evidence shows Antarctica once hosted lush ecosystems. Lake cores reveal signs of pollen, plant fibers, and warm weather microfossils. The continent wasn't always a desert of ice. If humans, or something like humans, lived there during that period, they may have left behind structures that are now buried under kilometers of frozen history. But the mystery deepens. In the 1990s, scientists drilling through the ice near one of the pyramid sites recorded strange electromagnetic readings. Their instruments malfunctioned. Compasses spun. Static crackled through radios. It was dismissed as interference from metal in the rock. But when ground-penetrating radar scanned the area, it showed unnatural angles and hollow chambers beneath the ice. Chambers, not caves, not crevices, chambers. And then there's the story that refuses to die. A classified military team in the early 2000s allegedly discovered an entrance, an opening deep within the ice, leading into a structure carved with perfect right angles. The photos, if real, were never released. The team was never named, but the rumor persists among Antarctic contractors and pilots. Somewhere beneath the ice, there are halls built by hands, hands that shouldn't have been there. Skeptics call this pure conspiracy. They point out that Antarctica is full of optical illusions, shadow tricks, wind-carved edges, and deceptive geometry. They argue that radar anomalies are common on glaciated terrain, but even they can't answer one question. Why do the most pyramid-like structures sit exactly on top of the continent's strongest geothermal hotspots? Hotspots that keep small regions of ice thin, as if heat were rising from something buried below. A natural vent? Maybe. A forgotten complex still warming the earth beneath it? The possibility is unsettling. If the Antarctic pyramids are real, if they are the remains of an ancient complex built before the world froze, then our entire understanding of prehistory collapses. Civilization did not begin in Mesopotamia. It did not begin in Egypt. It began somewhere we can barely reach, entombed beneath a continent of ice. And until that ice melts, or someone dares to dig deeper, its story stays locked away, waiting. In the far north, where the world dissolves into white horizons and freezing winds carve the land into silence, lies a secret hidden beneath miles of ancient ice. Not a ruin, not a fossil, but the shadow of a city, a structure so vast and geometric that modern researchers still argue whether it is natural or the last trace of a civilization erased by time. The story begins with a satellite anomaly. In the late 1990s, a joint NASA-ESA mapping program scanned Greenland using radar capable of penetrating nearly 3 kilometers of ice. Most of the data showed predictable patterns: glacial valleys, buried mountains, ancient riverbeds. But then came Grid 72A, a sector near the center of the ice sheet. The radar returned shapes that shouldn't exist: long corridors, right angles, parallel walls stretching for hundreds of meters. A layout too deliberate to be geological. Engineers dismissed it as a software glitch. But when the scan was repeated a year later, the formations were still there, unchanged, unmoving, unmistakably geometric. Word of the discovery never reached the public, but whispers spread through scientific circles about a deep ice anomaly, and soon a small, unofficial expedition was dispatched to investigate. Their findings were never published. Their names were never revealed. But one leaked internal report described what they found as a structure of unknown origin, with architectural signatures inconsistent with natural formation. Then everything went silent. Officially, Greenland holds no ancient cities, no pre-Ice Age civilizations, no man-made structures beneath the ice. Mainstream archaeology insists the region was uninhabited until a few thousand years ago. But the ice tells a different story. Ice cores extracted from the same region reveal sudden temperature fluctuations around 12,000 years ago, evidence of a catastrophic event that may have buried the land in a single brutal freeze. Beneath those layers lies sediment containing pollen from temperate forests, traces of freshwater species, and microfossils indicating that the Arctic once had rivers, lakes, and climates mild enough to support human life. If a civilization existed there, it would have been erased almost overnight. But the most compelling evidence came unexpectedly from a meltwater lake. As temperatures rose in the early 2010s, a massive subglacial lake began draining, exposing small pockets of land unseen for tens of thousands of years. In one of those pockets, researchers found stones arranged in a perfect arc. Not glacial debris, not random scatter, a foundation. Nearby, sonar detected what sounded like hollow space beneath the ice, chambers that resonated when hit with seismic pulses, chambers shaped like rooms. Still, the discovery was never officially acknowledged. Instead, the area was restricted for climate study, and subsequent expeditions were quietly canceled. Why? Some scientists suspect the Arctic city may predate known civilizations by tens of thousands of years, built during a brief interglacial period when the region was warm and habitable. A culture advanced enough to construct megalithic architecture, then destroyed when the climate shifted so violently that the ice swallowed everything. Others believe the city wasn't ruined by climate at all, but by its own technology. Ancient myths from the Inuit and Sami peoples speak of a great northern kingdom, one that harnessed the light of the sky and the fire beneath the earth, a kingdom that angered the spirits and was frozen as punishment. Most take these as legends, but their descriptions of shimmering towers, humming stones, and lights that danced in circles sound eerily like electromagnetic technology. And the Arctic is home to some of the strongest geomagnetic storms on the planet. If a civilization experimented with energy drawn from Earth's magnetic field, a single miscalculation might have triggered a chain reaction, destabilizing the environment, accelerating atmospheric collapse, or disrupting the climate so violently that the land froze solid in weeks. A technological catastrophe sealed in ice. Today, as climate change melts the Arctic faster than at any point in human history, more structures begin to emerge. Straight ridges, rectangular depressions, unnatural alignments exposed just long enough to be photographed before vanishing under fresh snowfall. Each new glimpse raises the same questions. Who were these people? How advanced were they? And why is no one allowed to investigate the anomaly at Grid 72A anymore? If a lost civilization lies beneath the Arctic ice, then the oldest chapter of human history is not written in sand or stone, but trapped in a frozen tomb, waiting for the world to thaw enough to reveal the truth. The story of the Arctic city isn't over. It's just buried. We like to think history is a straight line, from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced, from darkness into light. But the deeper we dig, the more the ground tells a different story, a story of civilizations rising, falling, and disappearing so completely that only fragments of their brilliance remain, etched into stone, carved into deserts, buried beneath oceans, and frozen under worlds of ice. Atlantis with its electric crystals, Lemuria and the sun disks, the Olmecs mapping a magnetic Earth, India's sky machines, Göbekli Tepe's silent warning, Nazca's power grid, Sumer's coded creators, Baalbek's impossible foundations, Antarctica's forbidden geometry, and the Arctic's frozen city. 10 stories, 10 warnings, 10 clues that our world once held knowledge far beyond what we're willing to admit. Maybe these civilizations vanished because of catastrophe. Maybe they destroyed themselves. Or maybe they reached heights we still don't understand and were swallowed by the planet's shifting skin before they could leave a message for us. But if even one of these cases is real, just one, then our past is bigger, stranger, and far older than we ever imagined. And the next question becomes, What else is still out there, waiting beneath the dust, the water, the rock, or the ice, ready to surface when the world is finally prepared to know the truth? Until then, keep your eyes open. The forgotten doesn't stay buried forever. This is Archive 9, closing file.